Hey, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Uh, Want to say welcome back after having a week off to everyone that's joining us today. I hope everybody in the United States there had a peaceful and safe Thanksgiving. We're glad glad to have you back. Um, you're here with Howie and Steve for another weekly webinar.
Right.
Just tell you a little bit about myself. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name's Howie Scott. I was in law enforcement for a minute, about 31 years. I spent my time on the street. Then I went to SWAT team for about 15 years, and then finished up my career at the academy. Took 4 days off between retiring and joining Crisis Consultant Group. Really believed in the message they were preaching, and I wanted to be part of the team to help make people safer. I originally started as the master instructor for our active threat program, and then got cross-trained in our de-escalation portion of our company. So that's a brief history about me. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that, so I'll hand it over to Steve, and then we'll get rolling into this.
Right on. Thanks, Howie. And I'm really excited to be here. My name's Steve Naglosky. First 17 years of my professional career, I worked in residential juvenile males, 12 to 17, residential treatment. And then the last 4.5, almost 5 years, I've been a full-time CES instructor. So I'm the lead for Calm Every Storm, the verbal de-escalation. I get the honor of working with Howie and love it. And I'm looking forward to today.
All right. Yeah. And hey, I neglected to talk about our most important person behind the scenes. Tracy, she's on there. She's the one that's putting out the information now in the chat, and we'll have more information as we go through the rest of this webinar. So let's talk about what we're talking about today. Today's topic is holiday de-escalation, professional versus personal. It's number 33 in our series, so we're really excited to do that. And just thinking about it, do the holidays ever create any stress over on your end? I failed to mention that you're way up north in Wisconsin, where it was a high of 9 degrees this morning. But how about that, Steve?
Right.
You ever had any escalated issues during the holidays?
I noticed for myself, even right now, I am, at home, I'm a little more on edge. Sure. We're looking at making sure you've got enough put away for Christmas presents, and you want everybody to be happy. So, yeah, I'd say you feel the stress for sure.
Yeah, and Steve, you failed to mention that you're now a week out from recovering from COVID.
That's accurate. Yep. But I'm here. So that's a great thing.
I know, and look at you, right? I mean, it's yeah. And for those of you who've been on other webinars and you notice that my beard's gone and my head's shaved, there was a guy I know that told me if I shaved my head and had a goatee, I'd be much better looking. So you might figure out who that was. But Steve, huh? So when we start talking about, the holidays and the stress that comes along with them and the potential for escalated situations and how we deal with them, right? We think that we have the ability to take what we teach professionally and transfer that into your personal life. I know that often for myself, I see that I am able to become more escalated with a loved one than I would in my professional career. And I'm not really understand where the emotional attachment to that loved one comes, where I feel like it's worth getting into it. Maybe it's at the end of the day, I know that they're still going to care about me, but for whatever reason, it seems like it's a lot easier to get baited into that argument at home than it is out in the professional world. You got any thoughts on that, Steve?
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. And I think oftentimes we have this professionalism mindset that only pertains to work. But we talk about dignity and respect, and that's something that has to be afforded to everyone, right? Including our family. And it's so easy for family to become a sounding board. And yeah, I think especially in these times when we're dealing with COVID and we're dealing with the holidays, we need to take a minute And we need to make sure that we're treating our loved ones with as much dignity and respect as we're teaching or as we're treating our coworkers and clients.
That's a really great point, Steve, when you talk about dignity and respect, and should you afford that to people even when you're not giving it?
You have to. You have to.
Right?
And
really
that's
hard.
hard.
Really hard, though.
Yeah.
Let me give you a
absolutely.
scenario. Give you a scenario. You got a 16-year-old daughter who doesn't want
Yep.
to treat you with dignity and respect. How easy is
Right.
it to treat her with dignity and respect and not pull the I'm big, you're small, I'm your dad, you're going to listen to me because I said so, right?
Right. So in those situations, I'm going to utilize a lot of self-talk. And that's something I talk about in all of our CES classes is that self-talk and maintaining that professionalism. Well, as a parent, I feel like I need to maintain that professionalism and be that positive role model for my daughter. Um, because man, it's easy to get sucked into that power struggle, right? And
There you go.
it's something that we're teaching daily in our classes. And whether I'm out on the road teaching a class or working with youth in a group home or residential setting, I have to remind myself that this is the way all people need to be treated. And I have to bring that professionalism home. And not that I think when you hear professionalism, you think sometimes it comes with kind of a cold connotation, and that's truly not it. It's holding yourself to a higher standard and being the leader.
Well, that's a good point. And so, Steve, I ask you now because you hit on something, and I wanted you to explain it a little bit more because I think it happens a lot in the personal
Sure.
life, power struggles, right? So, give me an example of what you're talking about when you're mentioning power struggles and how that can come into effect in your personal life.
Well, so when I look at a power struggle, what I see is always having to have the last word, right? That this is what needs to happen. And really it's no different than work. I I'm the parent and I'm going to give the direction to my daughter, but I have to do it with dignity and respect. It's not just the parental finger, hey honey, you need to do this. It's taking time, it's explaining it clearly. But once that information's given, it's not a debate. Because ultimately I am the parent, this is the expectation. I'm not going to argue it. And I'm not going to get sucked in emotionally because when everyone has to have the last word, we need to be heard. And so our cadence, our tone, our volume all comes up. We get louder. And next, we're in a yelling match. And that's not healthy for anyone.
Yeah, we often talk about how de-escalation is not defined matching a yell for a yell, right? And I
Right.
think sometimes we can certainly get baited into that with our kids, right? When they're not doing what they're told. And I think it's a good point too, where you equate that with the professional life, right? If you're in a group home setting, you can still treat
Right.
those young men with dignity and respect, but at the end of the day, the task that needs to be done needs to be done. But I think
Correct.
wrapping it up with dignity and respect is something that should be afforded to your family members, and not always the case because we do try to match that yell with a yell. So I want to go to the next portion of this topic and talk a little bit about how we can maybe offer up some things that happen at home, and how we have solutions when we introduce this in a course at the professional level. And it's talking about the 5 steps. And so if I look at the 5 steps of de-escalation, one of my favorites, because it's, for one, it's short, and the very first one is all about me, right? So I'm just gonna, ask you about that, Steve. Our first step in the 5 steps of de-escalation is what's in it for me.
Right. So That is one of mine too, because it can be what's in it for me. Um, it's personal, it can be selfish, right? It may be because I don't have the energy to fight. I don't yell through it. Um, it's going to putting a little bit on the front end will pay off huge dividends down the road. And so it's reminding yourself of why you're engaging, and you're going through why are you working to de-escalate this situation.
Absolutely. So, what's in it for me in the professional life is how am I going to keep myself safe? How am I going to walk away from this with my dignity and respect intact? And maybe not safety so much at home, but I think why do I need to attack this potential escalated situation, and what's in it for me? Well, I think one of the things we miss at home and what's in it for me is it's a teaching point, especially with your kids, because with your children, all your escalated situations are actually teaching points and how to teach them how to deal with escalated issues.
Right.
And so if we match that yell with a yell, that's what their learned behavior is going to be. So we really do have an opportunity to teach them in a way to handle escalated situations that they can be reinforced with a calm brought to the storm.
Absolutely.
You got anything on that?
I just agree totally.
And like we said earlier, okay, Steve, we're just having a little bit of technical difficulties with you.
Yep.
So we mentioned that early on. Okay, now you're back. So go ahead.
Yep. No. Yeah. I just agree. I think you're spot on. It's maintaining that standard, that professional.
Right on. So number 2, finding an end. What could be a find and an end, and how could we use that at home? I mean, it's different out on the street or in a group home. We can find something that it's an end there, but have you ever thought about that at home, finding an end with maybe one of your kids or one of your loved ones when things are escalated?
Well, it's funny because I hadn't, um, until you and I started talking about this as we were preparing for the webinar. It's I really focus in the group home to build that relationship and rapport. The great thing with family, specifically your children, they've been with you their entire lives. You know what their passions are. You know, I'm hoping you know what their loves are, and so that you should have an endless toolbox of experience to draw from, and you know what those passions. And so sometimes it's just a simple reminder of the commons that you guys share together, right? So finding an in, we've got the background, we've got the experience, we've got to slow down, we've got to reflect, we've got to maintain that professionalism and delve it off from one of the points over the last 16 years raising that beautiful child.
That's another good point. You said it, and I don't even know if you meant to say it the way you did, but I like it because you said we got to maintain that professionalism. Is being a parent a job? I believe so, right?
I do.
You have
Yeah.
an obligation to your child to make them the best person they can be. Ultimately, they will make decisions themselves, but the groundwork has to be left at home, right?
Right.
So I'm going to hit you up with something here on the spot and you don't know this is coming, but
great.
Help me out with finding an end with Aunt Betty, who complains about everything when she comes over for the holidays. Steve, the turkey I made, it's dry as jerky. How can you ruin it every year?
Well,
Help me out. How can I help with Aunt Betty?
well, what did Aunt Betty bring to Thanksgiving? Did she bring a fruitcake that you can barely choke down? It it's all right to say compliment her on her cooking, right? She knitted you that ugly sweater that's 3 sizes too big and itches horribly. Compliment her on it. See if she can't make one for your daughter who was just trying to engage you in a power struggle.
There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, once again, Aunt Betty, even though she's, just doesn't like life in general, we still have to treat her with dignity and respect. It goes back to the old adage, killing him with kindness, right?
Right.
So we'll move on to number three and meet a need. So when we talk about meeting a need, what are we talking about?
Well, it may not necessarily be what the initial crisis was about, but it's ensuring that that person knows that you're there to work with them and to help them through. So it's kind of like finding an inn. It's that common ground, and it could be something as simple as, hey, let's go for a walk, right? Come on, let's go get some fresh air together, or hey, let's go grab a soda, whatever it might be. Again, it may not be that initial area that we're having the fight, but it's showing investment and it's showing care. So meeting a need's huge. But again, it does not have to be about that initial crisis. It's finding, it can be something small, just finding a need.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. And once again, I know from experience that that's something that is for me overlooked at home. And especially, we're talking about the holidays, right? And not overlooked in my professional career. I'm much more willing to meet a need if, like, hey, can you just come over here and have a seat? Would you like something to drink? And I don't think about that. And I think it's because we get into that phase of at home where pride and ego come in, right? And
Absolutely.
I'm not just talking about, we may be picking on the kids a little bit, but a lot of times that's where these things happen, right? But it can happen with any family member. And once your pride and ego come into play and that's been assaulted, we quickly forget many of these techniques that we teach and practice in our public life. So I think that was a really good example about thinking about meeting a need, with your family members. And then finally, providing options. Go ahead.
Well, just one thing real quick on that. I really believe that all too often when we come home, we take that professional cap off and we don't hold ourselves to the same standard. Because we're letting our guard down a little bit and maybe feeling a little more relaxed where it's easier to snap back and we're not as conscious of our tone and volume and how we're responding to people, or maybe we take for granted the fact that, well, they're my kids, right? Where are they going to go? And we really have to role model. I saw that Angie had a comment. She said it's so funny that parents mimic the bad behaviors and then demand respect. So I'm assuming that she's a teacher and in her classroom with these ED kids, right? It's learned behavior. And I think that that's something we really have to be conscious of as parents is what are we role modeling? Just like we want to role model at work, it's so important that we are those same role models for our children. And it doesn't mean that we have to be prim and proper all of the time, but are we role modeling the skills and traits that we want our children to take out in the community?
That's such a great, valid point, Steve, because I think when we do lose our tempers at home, we're not having a conscious thought of anything you just said. I'm not thinking about how I'm being a role model other than a bad one when I resort to yelling and demanding and treat your kids or your other loved ones in ways that you wouldn't treat people in a professional setting, right?
Right.
Like I said, I think it goes back to the fact that once we feel like we're being disrespected in our home, the old pride guy pops up on your shoulder and says, "They can't talk to you that way," you know, and so he's sitting there going, "You need to tell them, this is your house and you can't be talked to that way," as opposed to really looking at that and using it as a teaching opportunity. I'm not going to match
Right.
a yell with a yell. I am going to remain calm. So the last one of the 5 steps is providing options. Just give us a little bit of detail on that, and we'll move on to another very important part.
Sure. So providing options, we've already found an in, right? We've met a basic need. Now we're looking at, we want to collaboratively come up with a solution. And if I like to plant seeds, because I'm going to promote my kids to come up with the solution, because anything they come up with is a lot smarter than anything their old dad could have came up with. And it promotes buy, right? Because if it's their idea, it's such a great idea. And it can just be a little twist what I would have recommended, but yeah, it's collaboratively coming up with a solution.
And great point there as far as having your kids come up with options, right? And are people that you may be dealing with over the holidays, and let them provide options. It's okay for someone else to have an idea as long as it works and the overall goal is being accomplished. So a lot of this 5 steps that we've talked about and the things we're emphasizing today has to do with self-awareness. How important is self-awareness at home in escalated situations, and just kind of define for me a little bit clearer about self-awareness and your thoughts about how important it is.
I think it's huge. We have to recognize when we're feeling stressed, right? Because we're a little bit quicker to snap back. And I know sometimes when I get nervous or scared, I use humor. And am I using humor at an inappropriate time? Nobody's perfect, right? There's no way I'm the perfect parent. I try my best. I want to be there, but all I can do is identify areas that I want to improve and continue that personal growth. And that's really where self-awareness comes in. It can go to body language, right? How are we walking into that situation? How are we holding it? There we go, right? Example. I'm talking to Maddie and she's asking me for something and I'm like, maybe I feel like I'm open, but I certainly don't look it. And it's kind of that old adage, did you tell your face, right? So what are we conveying?
Good point. You got any steps there, Steve, as far as things that you would consider that would be helpful, reminding yourself to be self-aware in that heat of that moment?
I go back to self-talk and how am I, because I look at myself as the leader of my home, right? It's my house. These are my children. I have to remind myself that they're children, right? Uh, 13 and 16. They're going through a lot. They've a lot of emotions, a lot of hormones coming in. And so I'm reminding myself of that, honestly, right now, almost nightly. As we move into the holiday season, there's there's a there it can be stressful for everyone. It's such a beautiful time of year, but it can also be super stressful. So it's, for myself, it's taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and making sure that we're getting the most out of this experience that we can, because we want to build positive memories, right? I hope that every holiday is a holiday that people can look back on with joy, honestly.
Yeah. So, I mean, great point there. As far as, being self-aware and what it really means, and ways to remind yourself, or am I being self-aware? I think what would be interesting is to challenge yourselves that are here today is to try to be more self-aware of how you're feeling, how you're projecting yourself. Something you mentioned earlier: cadence, tone, and volume when you're talking to your loved ones around the holiday, especially if something does become escalated. um, and what that really means is to step outside of your self kingdom, right? So
Yeah.
many times we live in our self kingdom where, what can you do for me? How come you're not making me happy? How come you're not listening to me? And a great point that you mentioned there, Steve, was it's stressful for everybody, not to mention we are in the middle of our I don't know where we are actually in a pandemic, right?
Right.
There's
Yep.
hope in the future with the vaccines coming and things like that, but that stresses out everybody. I mean, sometimes I don't really actually take into account about how stressed out my kids could be
Hmm.
and my family members. I just came back from visiting my mom down in Nashville, which is an area that's pretty high COVID rate. And, she's pretty much house ridden now because of her age and some pre-existing conditions. And
Right.
I didn't realize till I spent a week with her how stressful that can be, not being able to leave your home, because I've been up here and been able to move about, keeping my social distancing, wearing my mask and things like that. But I still haven't had to be confined to my home, and the stress of not seeing loved ones and possibly being, elderly and having some pre-existing conditions. So I think it's a great job as far as mentioning the fact that it's stressful for everybody, and get out of your self kingdom and realize that. And yes, I wanted to give kudos to Christine's comment also about how they handled that situation there.
Yes.
10 minutes, man, 10-minute investment. What's in it for me? You know? Um, so we're counting down the minutes here. We got about a minute and 45 seconds left. And I just want to recap a few things that we talked about, just for you guys to remember as you are continuing through the holidays. I want you to remember those 5 steps. And if you can't remember 5 of them, just remember what's in it for me. Why is it important? Think about it as being a teaching moment, not only to your kids. You could even teach your parent, your mom, your dad, your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You could teach them something on how you handle an escalated issue.
Right.
Be aware of your pride and ego. And then, like Steve was saying, promote yourself with positive self-talk and be self-aware. And Steve, I'm going to let you take out the last minute here, and then I'll follow up if there's anything left to follow up on.
Right on. I love the point that you talked about parents. You know, our parents are getting older, and the stresses that they're going through, I think, are very real. On top of, the fear of COVID, and then the holidays, and not being able to see your family, right? Maybe not necessarily being able to get together for the holidays. Um, I love one another. That's my advice for today. Take advantage of this time, love one another, be patient, and enjoy the season. Christine, I'll be coming and researching with you guys soon. Nice work. I love reading that stuff. Um, love hearing those successes. Anybody else, if you're interested, if you'd like the opportunity to have Howie and I come teach, we'd love that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. I wish you the best. Be safe. Angie, just because I saw that right there at the end, it's interesting. You said you work in an energy department. Steve and I spent a month out in the where St. Louis area for teaching a major energy corporation out there, and we taught this program for 3 weeks straight, and we loved it. We got to learn a lot about energy and energy people, the folks that are there day in and day out, and the crises they face. So thanks for joining us, and everybody who joined us today. Be safe, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, everybody.